Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to change my view here so I can see your faces. Anyone who would like to feels brave to share their camera, it would be great to see some faces on the screen with us. It's a pleasure to have you all with us here tonight. For this session, our aim is, I suppose, an exploration of what we're doing in the Certificate of Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies, what the course is about, what working in psychedelics is about, and how this is a shift and a change for a lot of people who are working in the current mental health system. And before I introduce our speakers and get into it, I'd like to take a moment to welcome everyone and get started. And so I might just invite everybody to get comfortable, settle into your seat, or if you're lying down, settle into your body however feels good. I'd invite you to close your eyes down as well if you feel comfortable, or perhaps just soften your gaze if you'd prefer, if that feels better for you. And then take a deep breath all the way in. And hold it. Feel that stretch. And then let it out. And now, just bringing your awareness to where you feel a connection with the ground beneath you. And that may be through your feet, it may be through your backside, on the chair or on the floor. And bring your awareness as much as you can, really focus on that connection and that feeling of gravity and of groundedness and of the ground beneath you. And as we all feel into that feeling of connection with the earth, and maybe that's through the floor, or maybe we can feel it directly, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, on the lands all around Australia and perhaps the world that we're meeting from digitally today. I would like to acknowledge their connections to lands, waters, and community, and acknowledge their elders, past and present. As we acknowledge these custodians, I would also like to acknowledge the deep wisdom that is held in First Nations cultures, but in many cultures also around the world, and in wisdom traditions from around the world that teach us how to live in harmony with the land, with waters, and with each other. And finally, I would like to acknowledge each one of us who's here on this call tonight, as we now are modern custodians of the land. And in that acknowledgement, I acknowledge each and every one of us as a beautiful, unique human in and of ourselves, but also as a responsibility that we have to learn what we can from the wisdom that exists so that we ourselves can also live in harmony with each other and with the world on which we walk. I'd invite everyone to take one last deep breath in and then let it out as we open our eyes back up and re-enter this space together. So, thank you for joining me in that to get us started. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. So joining me tonight is Dr. Ellie Kotler and Dr. Lauren McDonald, and I'll let each of them say a few words to introduce themselves and where they come from and what brings them here. So Ellie, I'll pass it to you first.
Thanks, Scott. That was a great welcome. Thank you. Currently, I'm sitting in my car, so I felt connected to my car that's like moving and shifting underneath me. That was a bit strange, but I'm here on family duties because my daughter has soccer practice. So that's where I am right now. That's me right now. I don't know. I'm a person. I'm Ellie. I'm a psychiatrist. And I hope you'll get to know me a little bit, I guess, in the next hour. Yeah, that's all that I'll say at the moment. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. I will add on top of that he is the Australian course director for the Certificate in Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies as a relevant piece of context setting as well. So Lauren, I'll then pass it to you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here with you all. So I'm Lauren. I am currently in Melbourne, but I'm from the UK. And my background is in psychiatry. But for the last few years, I've been working at the Centre for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College across a range of different psychedelic trials. And I also am a retreat facilitator, facilitating legal psilocybin retreats in the Netherlands. And yeah, have various other roles as well. And then within my medicine, I'm one of the leads for the residentials as well. One of the kind of the experiential training component of the course. So yeah, I think that's me. Lovely to be here with you all.
Terrific. Thank you, Lauren. And just as a few words of introduction from myself as well, I am the Executive Officer at Mind Medicine Australia. So I sort of help to lead our team. I work closely with our Executive Director, Tanya de Jong, and Chair Peter Hunt, who are also our founders. Tanya, who's here today. So hi, Tanya. I'm not sure if you'd like to say a couple of words to say hello as well while we have everybody here.
Hi, everyone. It's beautiful to have you here, and we're so excited about this next intake of CPAT because we have such an extraordinary faculty, and we're also bringing Dr. Geeta Vade to Australia to lead the intensives with Dr. Lauren McDonald. So we're extraordinarily lucky to have such a rich group of leaders who can take you through this really extraordinary experience of learning about these states of consciousness, but so much more. I mean, many people who do this training describe it as the best professional development they've ever done in their whole careers. And some of those have been doing professional development for many decades.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Tanya. And so just to finish giving a little bit of an intro to myself, I have a bit of a winding road and a few different aspects to my career, but I have a background in education. I founded a little startup and education company in my 20s, and that was where I got into educational design and course design, and then transitioned into body work and then somatic therapy. So this is I guess the therapeutic background that I bring and interest that I bring into the work and into this space. That's a little bit of an introduction to me. And so to set context for tonight, what we were keen to do before we dive into some of the details of working with psychedelics and the course itself was to just talk a little bit about what it's like to work in the current mental health system. And so this is a question I have not just for Ellie and Lauren, but I have for everybody on this call, which is, what is your experience of working in the current mental health system? Now, I'm going to pass it to Ellie first to speak to it, but I would encourage anyone else who'd like to, please share some words in the chat, just so that we can hear from everyone and have something a little bit interactive about what everyone's experience is like as they're working with the system we have for now. But Ellie, please, if you'd like to get us started.
Yes, I think that's a great place to start, because maybe like some other people that are interested in psychedelics, part of the reason that I got very interested in psychedelics for a number of years already was that I wasn't that happy with the current system. So I've worked in public psychiatry for many years, and then for the last 7 years, I've been the medical director of a private psychiatric hospital. I have found private psychiatry more rewarding, in that if I want to, sit with someone for 2 hours, I can do that, and there's lots of group therapy, and I found that there's much more freedom. But I do think that there are also bigger issues with the mental health system. I never connected to, well, it's not true, I never. I guess I've come to not particularly connect with the current paradigms, including the diagnostic paradigms that we use in mental health. I don't use them in my work, and that doesn't really fit into the system, because the system is very diagnosis driven. It's like, if you don't have the diagnosis, then it's like the treatments, so like driven by the diagnoses, and it all sort of comes back to the diagnosis. And so I guess being someone that doesn't particularly find diagnoses helpful and sometimes harmful, I guess the system I don't really fit in the system, I think. And so one of the reasons why I got interested in psychedelics was not only that I think they can actually help people, which would be nice. But also I do think psychedelics have, I hope, the power to change the paradigms of mental health, because I don't think psychedelics care if you have major depression or obsessive compulsive disorder, or is it, is it persistent depressive disorder, or is it, is it generalized anxiety disorder, is it PTSD, or is it complex PTSD? I don't think psychedelics really care. I think psychedelics care that you're human and you're suffering. And so I hope that we can see some changes in the mental health system, because it doesn't really fit for me, the mental health system, as well as all the obvious problems. Like, I mean, I will say one thing. I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, there's always funding issues in the mental health system, but I think throwing more money and doing the same thing is not necessarily going to improve outcomes. I do think we need to do things differently, more systemically, more holistically, and perhaps with the DSM out the back or something in the shed. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I'll say at the moment. Thanks, Scott. I can ask Lauren maybe to share her thoughts.
Yeah, I would just agree with everything you said, Ellie. I guess coming from the UK and the NHS, I'm sure your system's slightly different, but I can definitely speak for the NHS as being incredibly underfunded and staff being really overstretched. And just like for so many of the patients that I was treating as a psychiatry doctor, there was this sense that not for all patients, but for the vast majority, we weren't kind of getting to the root cause of the issues and really treating the whole person. It was like we were sticking on a plaster and sending them back out. And then, of course, there was this like revolving door patient that, of course, would come straight back. And I think over the years, I felt myself becoming more exhausted. My colleagues just becoming exhausted, burnt out, demoralized. So like the energy of the whole team as well was really affected. And obviously that has an impact on patients as well. So yeah, just the whole system really felt like it was crumbling. And I haven't actually worked in psychiatry now for kind of mainstream psychiatry for 3 years. I've been obviously more in the psychedelic space, but I can imagine it's just got a whole lot worse as well. So it really felt like, at least in the UK, like something had to change. Like we couldn't keep treating mental health in this way, just treating symptoms, not really getting to the root cause, like underfunding of therapies, and just like teams like really crumbling. So hence why I moved into psychedelic therapy.
Terrific. Thanks, Lauren. I think, Ellie, you're on mute. I see.
I was just going to add, just to roll with it, like sometimes I think, like, isn't it crazy that like in our culture, so someone that's like feeling crap, like what's the average? And this is someone with like resources, like, yeah, so some basic resources. This is, someone with some basic resources, they're feeling crap, and the general pathway is to go to a doctor, and I'm a doctor, so I can, criticize the system. But to go to a doctor and get a medication, like that is what happens to most people. And in Australia, we have 1 on 6 people on antidepressants. And it's a little bit crazy. Like if that's how we deal with emotional difficulties, it's like, I'm not sure what that says about our society, but I think it suggests that something's a little bit off. I better stop before I get fired from my job or something.
Terrific. Thanks, Ellie. And even just to pull out a couple of comments here in the chat, I can see quite a few others in here. And thanks so much to everyone who did share, who are resonating with some of this, of noting the feeling of working with people going through a revolving door, managing symptoms and some of these challenges that exist. And I'll even maybe just as a brief comment, a lot of the work that I did as a body worker wasn't in the mental health system. I was working with often with people with physical, and physical challenges. And I feel sometimes came from an opposite perspective I was trained to work with the body originally by people in a way that was mechanical and pretended there wasn't a mind inside, and it felt similarly but oppositely incomplete to not address the person living in that body that I was originally trained to work with, almost like a machine. And I think that some of these incomplete paradigms, multiple different incomplete paradigms, to me sometimes feels like a huge challenge that we sort of have in our current, perhaps that's even broader into healthcare in general. And so off that, I'd like to transition into asking you both to speak a little bit more then and expanding of then, how did you both find your way towards working in psychedelic-assisted therapy? And what have you noticed, and what's the experience like working as a clinician with psychedelics? Perhaps, Lauren, I'll pass this one to you first.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I would say, so I basically had both a personal and professional journey into this field. I think as so many people entering this space, there's this this concept of like the wounded healer, and often we kind of move into spaces where we found our own healing, and that was definitely true for me. Just to give you a little bit of context. So back in 2016, I was a junior doctor and I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I went through treatment, fortunately went into remission, but it was a huge journey for me. And I really got firsthand experience of becoming a patient in the healthcare system, experiencing the trauma of a life-threatening diagnosis, of existential anxiety, of just the enormity of that experience. And even though I went into remission, I very much was struggling with fear of recurrence. So I ended up finding my way to psychedelics in legal setting. I went off to the Netherlands because I'd read research, Roland Griffiths' research on psilocybin as being a potential treatment for end-of-life anxiety and cancer-related distress. So it really was my own personal journey of healing that brought me into this space. And off the back of my own experience, I just was so, I was left with this sense that this was exactly what my psychiatry patients also needed. That really, you know, I've been trying all the things for a while to get on top of my anxiety and to really process the trauma I've been through. But it was only through psychedelics that I kind of got really to the root cause of what I was struggling with and got to process it. And yeah, I just had this like real understanding that actually for so many of the patients, this is what they needed as well. So I went back to psychiatry and I've been on a bit of a long road essentially to slowly try and get psychedelic therapies to other patients, other cancer patients struggling with existential distress. And along the way, I've been working on numerous trials. So most recently, psilocybin therapy for anorexia nervosa, but also psilocybin therapy for chronic pain and treatment-resistant depression. And I've just fallen in love with the work. I really have. Like, I think for so long, I kept thinking maybe I'd leave medicine. I even left medicine for a while. I trained as a yoga teacher and I trained in nutrition, and I really wanted to work in a holistic way. And every time I came back to psychiatry, I couldn't seem to make it work. There wasn't the funding. I couldn't work in private clinics in the UK. And there was this sense of like, I was really missing a big part of kind of what it means to help people be well, you know, not just treating the mind and the brain, but really looking at the body and the ecosystem of that the person is in as well. Not really, you know, psychiatry is so individualistic, and actually we forget that, you know, this person is part of a system, and so often it's the system that's the issue, not the person. And so I've kind of come into psychedelic-assisted therapies, and I just love that I get to work in a holistic way, that it's integrative, that, you know, as Scott just mentioned, like the body, like somatic therapies are really important in this space, like the relational aspect. You know, I love that essentially the therapeutic container is key to this work. And it really is about meeting the person in front of you, kind of human to human, heart to heart, which is so different to the model I was working in, where I was a physician, the patient was there, there's definitely kind of more of a hierarchy, there's a power imbalance, whereas this work really feels like we're less in fixing mode, and we're really there to walk alongside the person as they find their way to wholeness, which is just a complete paradigm shift and so different to the way I'd been working. So yeah, I think I'll stop rambling, but yeah, I just think it's such special work. I mean, there's definitely a lot of challenges which we will get into as well, but it's really incredible, the depth of healing and the transformations that I've witnessed over the last few years. Pass you over to Ellie.
So I think the first bit was how I got into it. Is that right? Yeah, I think. So I still can't remember. Maybe Tanya remembers. I can't remember how this happened, but I found myself at a Mind Medicine Australia screening of a documentary called Trip of Compassion. It was probably about 6 years ago. I don't know, 5 years ago. And I still to this day can't remember how I got there, but I was there. Obviously something intrigued me. Mind Medicine Australia were filming a documentary Trip of Compassion, which is an amazing documentary which documents and films people's experiences on MDMA therapy. It was filmed as part of a MAPS study in Israel. And they had cameras in the rooms and they followed the people up. At that point, I was working mainly as a therapist I was working in the psychiatric hospital, but I worked mainly therapeutically. And I had worked with a number of people over many years. And some of the people that I worked with over many years did, I think, get better or healthy, whatever that meant to them. Some of them. And, you can see that transformation, and it's, generally a painful transformation, and it takes a hell of a long time, and it's really expensive. And what I saw in that documentary was like people going through that journey, but in a matter of months rather than the years of literally at least weekly therapy that I was doing with people. And that just like blew me away because, to me, this was not just like another treatment that comes out like, I don't know, like TMS, EMDR, like great new treatments, awesome. But it's like, I don't know how that works. I don't get it. It might help some people, it might not help other people, and it helps some people, and that's great, awesome if it helps anyone. But I don't get it. I don't like really connect to the treatment as something that I connect to personally. Whereas with the psychedelics, I saw people really going through a healing journey, and I could see that and understand it, so this was like something that I could really understand, like I can see how this can work for people. It like catalyzes some type of internal journey, through the pain, through the trauma, like that just makes sense to me. And then they can come out the other side, more integrated and more healed and sort of get on with their lives. So that's how, and then I emailed Tanya and Peter and here I am many years later. But so that's how I came to be involved with psychedelics. But again, I think it had something to do with just not connecting to the current system, how it was working, and sort of seeing a different way that it's like, oh yeah, that looks good. Like that looks like it could help people. I can't remember if I was supposed to answer anything else.
And so, as I guess, moving on from there or building on this a little bit more, the way that psychedelics work is obviously still a hugely open question, but perhaps it would be worth sharing perhaps just a little bit of your personal observations and theories of how it functions. And then we're going to move from there into sort of some of these really key principles for working skillfully in the space. But either of you, would you like to jump in first with what you've observed and how you feel you're seeing these sorts of outcomes?
Want me to go, Ellie? Okay. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background. So I've been a psychedelic therapy guide for just over 60 psilocybin sessions. So in the kind of formal clinical trial setting. And then I've guided well over 200 participants in the group retreat setting as well in the Netherlands. So most of my experiences with psilocybin, I've completed a few MDMA trainings as well, but yeah, for the most part, my background is psilocybin and DMT. And I guess I say all of that because I find psilocybin just to be such a fascinating medicine. Of all of these sessions I've guided, I would say there's definitely been huge variety in every single guiding session. It's unpredictable. As a guide, you're really kind of opening up to the unknown, and as I said before, just really making sure that you've fully prepared your patient, your client to go towards whatever it is that is going to come up for them. And as I mentioned, it is that therapeutic container that is so important. Like, this work requires such trust and such safety, so that people can really surrender to the experience and be curious and go towards difficult memories, difficult experiences, whatever it is that's coming up to be processed as part of their healing experience. And sometimes you do a lot in a session, and other times you don't do much, or at least from the outside, you don't appear to be doing much. Obviously, as a psychedelic therapy guide, sitting there on a psilocybin session for 7 hours or so, even if you're not required to do much in the way of, supportive touch or speaking with the participant, you're there kind of as loving presence. And as you can imagine, sitting there for 7 hours, very, very present, kind of attuned to the person in front of you, but also attuned to your own process. It's a lot going on, and it's unlike any work I've ever done before, but it is hugely rewarding. And just witnessing these transformative processes is quite incredible. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, it's great. Ellie.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this, like, how does it work? And we could speak for hours about the science, and we do in the course, but I have a sneaking suspicion that science will never have the answer in terms of how the psychedelics work, because I think it's about the human experience. It's something about the human experience that science just cannot understand. So, we can talk about serotonin receptors and entropy and the default mode network and free energy, which we do. And it's really interesting stuff. Like, science is great. I like science. But I feel that there's something that the science can't quite reach, which is, how does it actually work? And I don't think the science can reach it, because there is something, I think, in the human experience that is how psychedelics work. I think you have to go to the subjective realm to really understand how psychedelics work, rather than something objective or theoretical. And, so far I've, in my limited experience relative to Lauren, but in my limited experience so far treating people, it's working kind of how I thought it would work, which is by generally allowing people to, I'm working with MDMA at the moment, allowing people to explore the parts of their mind that they previously couldn't, that were too scary or too awful, or that they didn't want to be true, or that they didn't want there. And yeah, to being able to access more of themselves. And so to be able to be a more integrated human being. So yeah, that's how I'm understanding it at the moment.
Amazing, thanks. I even want to just make a quick observation of mine on this one as well. I guess another piece of my background that has felt very relevant is my interest in meditation and deep meditation practice, and time spent on retreat and things like that. And one of my observations that I've felt over the last few years is that when we can create an environment that allows subconscious material to rise to the surface, and then to arise and then be processed, then this is like central to change, whether we're looking at this as a practice from someone cultivating wellness or overcoming sort of an illness, if we want to frame it that way. And that in doing that, that can be done in many different ways, but a psychedelic appears to be a tool that allows subconscious material. The psychedelic means mind manifesting, as everyone will learn in the course, to allow that material to surface. And then if well held by well-skilled practitioners, then it appears to be quite an effective way to allow it to then be held safely and processed. And I guess this is something that when I look at this from, I guess, my experience as a meditator as well as a therapist, that this psychedelic-assisted therapy seems to bring some of these ideas together in a really coherent way. Yeah, this is certainly something as I work in this field that seems to be clear to me, perhaps. And so to switch gears now from, I guess, talking a little bit about what it's like to work in this training program, which the next group is starting in July. It runs over 4 months, and the reason that it runs over 4 months and it's not just something that's trained in a weekend is because we don't feel that it can be safely trained in a weekend, because there's quite a lot of depth to this work and there's quite a lot to it. And so we'd like to spend this next period just exploring what some of the really key themes are, just to open this up, because there are key areas that are important for working in this field as well as key challenges. And to begin with, just to pass perhaps Lauren to you first to share what are some of the key principles for working skillfully with psychedelics, and just a little bit of an introduction to how it is that we handle these in the training.
Lauren, just before you answer that question, I'm just looking through the chat, and there seems to be quite a lot of questions about why psychedelic-assisted therapies are so different from other classes of pharmaceuticals. So maybe you can include that in your answer just now.
Yeah, and I guess just to highlight as well that obviously different psychedelics work in different ways. So there's not really a kind of one particular answer. It really depends on which psychedelic you're talking about. So for example, MDMA is obviously really good for trauma, working with trauma like PTSD, because it enables the client to have that sense of safety and to go towards memories that maybe they couldn't go towards, or indeed, didn't have access to without the MDMA on board. So they are very different the way they work. But ultimately, it's getting to the root of the issue. It's the root of the trauma. So whereas pharmaceuticals, often it's working on this kind of chemical imbalance theory, at least with antidepressants, this is trauma work. This is looking at and I'm not just talking about trauma work as in kind of developmental trauma, but just all types of trauma. So people kind of struggling with neglect, struggling with other issues in their life. And it's not about just kind of bandaging them up and sending them on the way, but it's really letting them be seen, letting them be witnessed, really, really kind of walking alongside them as they ultimately also heal themselves. And I think that kind of speaks to your point, Scott, of like the skill set required. I'd say the more I do this work, the more I come back to this concept of like loving presence as the ultimate kind of skill or way of being in this work, because we're not in fixing mode. We're not necessarily trying to patch people up and send them on their way. It's really, we're really being with people and bringing our full presence and compassion and care, really for their inner healing intelligence to do the healing. And when I say inner healing intelligence, it's this concept that the body, the mind, the kind of the human knows how to heal. We have a kind of instinctive drive towards wholeness and well-being. And given the right setting, the right circumstances, we will move towards that. And it's really this idea of like integrating parts of self. So, for example, with trauma, often we get dissociated parts, and it's really about bringing them back into wholeness. And yeah, it's loving presence. I think that is really one of the key skills that we teach on this course, but that is just so key to this work. Of course, you know, we will teach you about ethics and these kind of things like, you know, informed consent, supportive touch, all of these things that are quite unique to psychedelic therapy. But it really does come down to kind of your way of being in the room with the client. So I would say I'll let Ellie chime in with some other thoughts, but yeah, I think that's just me for now.
I was thinking of a whole lot of things. I was thinking as you were talking, I don't really know what loving presence is. I think that's something I've better improve before the next course. Yeah, I don't know how good I am at loving presence. I was thinking of, and maybe it's the same thing, but like, you know, being like real, like I think truth is something very important in therapy, and particularly psychedelic assisted therapy. Like to be really honest with yourself and potentially with the person that you're working with, if you think it's going to be helpful. And I've always, yeah, I think I can't even remember what the question was, but something you said inner healing. There's definitely something in the mind that does that, you know, like I've seen so many times working in the hospital that I work with. I work with people with addictions. It's an addiction hospital that I've been trying to run for about 7 years. And so, you know, pretty much every single person has significant trauma. And it's so clear that the mind, you know, once you get someone in a safe space, the mind all of a sudden allows things to come up that it hadn't before, you know, and it's not a conscious process. It's clearly not a conscious process. The person, once they feel safe, once they feel some trust, once they're contained, you know, all of a sudden the mind will send some things up, you know, and it's as if the mind, you know, the mind is saying like, okay, you're ready to deal with this now, you know, like let's do it, you know. That's not a conscious thing. That's obviously the mind, you know, to me, that's the mind trying to heal itself. You know, I do think there's something in the mind which tries to heal itself, which moves towards integration if allowed. You know, I think like for the mind to integrate, you have to create a space and give the person, you know, you can facilitate it. There are things you can do to facilitate the integration, but the integration will happen on its own in the right time and in the right space and with the right insight. It will just click and it will happen. And, you know, so clearly for me, the mind has some type of integrative, you know, it wants to, it's almost like it wants to integrate. You just got to, you know, allow the space and the trust and the insight for it to happen. That's what I was thinking as you were talking, Lauren. Did I answer the question?
You did.
Good.
Lauren, did you have anything else that you wanted to add off the back of that?
Yeah, I think in terms of like what we're both talking about, Elliot, it's this like non-directive approach, and the fact that actually we're not, as clinicians, therapists, we're not well, we might have an agenda, but we definitely have to leave our own agenda at the door. And it's like we're space holders more than anything. And of course, we all come with our background, our training, whatever it is we're bringing. And there definitely does need to be a therapeutic holding, especially in terms of preparing the client and in helping with integration. But actually, so often in the dosing session, it's actually just patient-led, client-led, and we're really responding to what's coming up with them. And just being holding a non-judgmental space, inviting curiosity, being really open to whatever's emerging in the field. And I think that what's also different in psychedelic therapy versus other maybe types of therapies, but maybe not things like transpersonal therapy, but is this idea of working with the mystical and the spiritual. And it can be a real departure from your way of working if this isn't something, you know, if you're not trained in, say, transpersonal psychology. But so often that is what emerges in the space. So it tends to be that people either have really kind of emotional breakthroughs, insights, huge cathartic experiences, or they're much more on the kind of mystical, transpersonal realm. And I think as a psychedelic therapist, you really have to be able to just bring curiosity. And of course, we have our own beliefs, our own biases, but really just leaving those at the door and letting it be fully client-led, and just responding to whatever's coming up in the room.
And I might just to be contrary, you know. So I've been working with two of the lecturers we have on the course are these amazing ladies from Switzerland, because in Switzerland they've been doing this for years. So there's a small number of psychiatrists in Switzerland that have been able to prescribe psychedelics for many, many years. And we're very fortunate to have really good connections with some of them. And one thing that's come up for me in my recent experiences with MDMA is that, so I was, you know, so I'm still learning, you know, I guess we're all learning, but so there is this obviously this idea of being very very exploratory and very non-directive. But I did, you know, I have seen someone who was so, they were so heavily defended, and so their mind was so resistant to entering into themselves and into their body and into their feelings, that me and my co-therapist, so that's another thing we have to talk about, co-therapists. But my co-therapist and I both really felt during the session that we had to do something. Otherwise, it would be 7 hours of resistance and defense. So we actually were quite directive for some time, and we are clearly biased, but we both thought that the intervention was good. And so, you know, potentially there's a difference, and, you know, this is an open question. I'm not saying, you know, this is an open question. Potentially there's a difference between being totally non-directive and potentially being directive, but to direct the person towards themselves. You know, that's potentially one place where directiveness in this type of therapy may be appropriate, to direct them towards themselves, because maybe there is a lot of resistance and a lot of defenses. So just thought I would raise that to be a contrarian. And yeah.
I feel that that's a great point, and I think that it's a very valid distinction to make between directing somebody back towards themselves and directing their awareness back inside, rather than directing them to do something, you know. As I think that's they're two very different things, and I think often a lot of practitioners are maybe much more used to directing in that more external sense. And I think that there is a key distinction, and some of these are really, you know, valid ideas and important ideas to explore, that you'll learn a lot more about in the course as we explore a lot of these in much more depth.
Can I just jump in and just quickly as well? Ellie, I totally agree with you. I think there's definitely times when you need to intervene, and on the course, especially in the experiential aspect, we go through all of these. That there's so many things that you can suggest to a client to try, especially if they're like thought looping, or they're really stuck in their mind, or like you said, kind of defenses are up, and you need to kind of gently move around the defenses, or just work with them, even like the protector parts. So there's a lot you can do. I'm not saying that you kind of just sit there doing nothing, but it's more in terms of letting the client lead the session for the most part, and letting their intention, letting them guide it, and then working with them to support them if they get stuck or they need a bit of help. Often using the body as well. So often actually getting clients to get really into their bodies is the way to help them get unstuck. So yeah, we go through all of this on the training. But I'd just like to say that.
Terrific. And so this segues into perhaps the last question that I'll pose to both of you before we open up to questions from everybody else on the call, is about some of the real challenges. There was a great comment earlier I noticed from somebody in the chat who commented and said that they do have some skepticism because they see potential benefits, but also adverse events and challenges. And I think it is important for us to sort of, introduce some of those and what the challenges are around working in this space.
Sorry, I might just say, sorry, I didn't mean to sound, I know, I realize in retrospect, I may have sounded, what's the word? Flippant about EMDR and other therapies. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be flippant about it. I was just using them as an example of therapies which I don't understand how they work, but they seem to work for some people. That's and I was contrasting that to psychedelic-assisted therapy, how it seems to me very clear why and how it works. So, I apologize. I didn't mean to sound flippant, even though I'm sure I did. But so a couple of things actually just came. I want spirituality. Lauren mentioned spirituality, and I just wanted to say, I mean, personally, I have a conflict, complex relationship with things like God and spirituality and things like that, as many people probably do. But I can definitely say that I've felt in some of the sessions that I've done, it's so intense and intimate, and there are 3 of you there, that it really has felt holy. And I think that's the best word to describe the experience of how it's felt for me. I'm not saying like the whole 7 hours feels holy, but there's a few moments in there which are just, I think holy for me is the sort of term that came up in terms of, profound connection. I mean, you can't put, it's very hard to put words on these things, but yeah, just it can be really, really, really profound. With the 3 people in the room, the sort of the connection and the depth that you can access. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ellie. I might even use the word sacred as well. I think maybe this is also one of the challenges, in answer to your question, Scott, about like what therapists kind of working in this space need to grapple with. But like, I certainly feel this work is sacred. Like, we create a sacred container, and it's deep and rich and beautiful. And a lot of the material that comes up is kind of got spiritual quality or an existential quality. And I think especially kind of as psychedelics move into the medical model, we have a real responsibility to honor wisdom traditions and just recognize more than anything that these sacred medicines have been used by these cultures all around the globe for millennia, often in ceremonies with ritual and intention, and not always for, healing of, conditions that we're looking to treat here, but actually for spiritual exploration and growth and personal development and community building as well. And I do feel that obviously we're kind of going down the medical model, but this is sacred work. And as you start to kind of work in this space, I think it's difficult to sanitize this work and to really allow it to go fully down the medical model as it currently stands. So I think that we all really have a responsibility to kind of definitely honor where these medicines have come from and kind of indigenous ways of knowing and being, but doing so in a way that avoids cultural appropriation and causing more harms. And I think we're still, the psychedelic field, the psychedelic therapy field is still relatively in its infancy. So there's certainly going to be mistakes made. We're learning as we go. But I just think to have that acknowledgement as we kind of start working in this space is really crucial. And as well, just recognizing that this isn't like, if you decide to work in this space, like this is really an apprenticeship. I've been working in the space now for nearly 5 years, and I still feel like I have got a lifetime worth of knowledge to kind of gain. It's not something that you kind of do a quick course and you're done and you're a psychedelic therapist and you're kind of top of your game. I think that it's really important to recognize this is a calling more than anything. And hopefully, if you love learning, like I love learning, I love personal development, I love my own journey and my growth. So it definitely suits me and my personality. But I think it's something to really ask yourself, like, do you want to kind of walk down this path? Are you willing to keep doing the work, your own inner work, but also really learning as well? Because I think as the space evolves, at the moment, it is very non-directive, psychedelic therapy for the most part, but it might be that ends up being more ACT focused or IFS focused, or maybe it's going to be a big weaving of all of these different therapies to kind of get the best possible outcomes. And we just don't know yet. So yeah, it's an evolving space. It's a really exciting space, but I think you're going to need to be able to be flexible and move with it as well.
And I might just riff off that I was just looking through some of the questions. Yeah, so I think it was interesting for us to try and design this course, and we keep sort of updating and trying to change it because we realized that there is a wealth of information to absorb, and and we do that, and that's great. But that's all like information coming from the outside in, it's like, how do psychedelics work? What's the chemistry, all the medication, contraindications, and, SSRIs, and there's all this information to like take in, but that's like what I take in. But really what makes someone a good psychedelic assisted therapist is going to be themselves. How reflective can I be about myself? How much work have I done with myself? Can I sit with someone else's pain? What am I scared of in the session? Am I going to shut things down because I'm scared or because they're scared? All these issues which you can't actually teach. And so what we've tried to do in the course, I saw someone said, is there psilocybin as part of the course? If it was legal, there would be, but it's not legal. But what we've done in the course is we've tried to, so there's the information side of the course, and then we've built in a self-development side of the course to try and get people to have a little bit of a taste of what their patients or clients are going to have. So we've built in a self-development model with a lot of prep work to try and, we can't do it, to try and encourage people to challenge themselves, to lean into something that maybe they're scared of, or that they haven't done before, try and explore something in themselves that they haven't explored before. And then on the weekends, when we do the residentials, we do holotropic breath work. And so, if you imagine it's like a psychedelic assisted therapy session. So you do all this prep work, but instead of the MDMA or psilocybin or whatever it is, we do holotropic breath work together. And then there's, some integration of that. So we've tried to build self-development into the course because we do believe that ultimately that's what's going to make someone a good psychedelic therapist or not, because anyone can gain the knowledge, the facts of the factoids of how everything works. But we really want to try and impress upon people that it's our own work that makes us better and better therapists throughout our lives. And holotropic breathing is, I didn't know anything about this before I did it, but it's a way of breathing that can trigger a psychedelic type experience. And I can say, I did it and I had an extremely, extremely profound experience that went on for hours. It was quite amazing just from breathing. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Scotty, I just wanted to just ask a question here. There was a whole bunch of questions here at the end that were terrific. I'm just looking for one at the moment. Hold on. I just wanted to talk about the opportunities that there are for practicing in the course now. So I don't know if you said this, Ellie, but you actually were the first psychiatrist after 50 years to start treating patients in Australia. I don't know if you actually said that because you're a very modest guy. But Ellie was the first person after 50 years to treat a patient in Melbourne in January. And so now there are a number of psychiatrists in Australia who are authorised prescribers, and they're working with teams of therapists who are trained through our CPAT course. So there are many opportunities to work in this field. And I'm sure Scott's going to tell you all about that.
I will. And I think with this, we might transition now because I want to actually just get into a few of the details about the course itself, just into some of the practical aspects of what it looks like for everyone on the call. And then from there, we'll open up into questions for the rest of the time that we have together. And so I'm just going to put a couple of slides up so that we can run through this, as we've kind of really spoken from a high level about some of these principles that are really important in the space to get an idea of what we're, I guess, what we're trying to do and what we see is really important in training people in this field. And so now just to go through the practical stuff, perhaps the slightly less interesting but still important things. The Certificate in Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies it's a 4-month training program. It focuses on 3 psychedelic medicines, principally MDMA, psilocybin, and ketamine, which are the 3 in Australia that currently have regulatory approval. The eligibility criteria, we accept applications from a very wide range of healthcare professionals, as you can see listed there. And it's important to mention we do accept applications from students as well. So if you're training towards working in the healthcare field, then you are still eligible. The faculty that we have, and Lauren and Ellie are 2 of the leaders of the faculty, and we're very grateful and fortunate to have them sort of really taking a directing role in the training. And they're supported by really the leaders of this field internationally. For those who have been following psychedelics for any length of time, they will recognize some of these faces. And for those who haven't, you soon will. People like David Nutt, Bill Richards, Rick Doblin have been really leading this space for many years, in some cases decades. And we're incredibly fortunate in this training program to give everyone an opportunity to learn from really the people who have been doing this for as long as possible, you know. And some of whom, Bill Richards, for example, was, I think, one of the last person in America to legally dose psilocybin in the 70s, before research really closed down. From this faculty, you'll be learning from the bulk of them in the online portions, but then Lauren, and for example, in this current course, we have David Arizzo from Imperial College coming out. And then, as Tanya mentioned at the start, Geeta Vade, who is our course director from New York, is coming to Australia in November and October to teach with Lauren and Ellie at the in-persons for this next group. The way that the course works is it is taught over 14 weeks online. Essentially, there's a class each weekend and then some reading materials in between. This covers the knowledge base, and then on top of that, the experiential classes is what Ellie talked about, which is this more introspective, self-reflective personal development part. At the end of the online portion, these 2 sort of converge in the in-person. And at this, you will work with anyone who does join in July. Will work with Ellie, Lauren, and Geeta, as you'll be learning via role play, group discussions, cases and things like that, as a way to start to bring everything to life, that then closes in the breathwork protocol. It's an adaptation of holotropic to really make it as appropriate and as applicable to this environment as we can. So you'll actually work in small groups with students to lead each other through the preparation and then the dosing or breathing in this sense, and then integrating that experience for each other. And this is something, I mean, I think I'm really proud of. I think we're all really proud of in those of us who've designed it, to bring something together that really feels like a cohesive and very full course. This here is just a really brief overview, and we can send these slides out afterwards for anyone of what these modules are, to get an idea that this doesn't just cover the technical aspects, but also theoretical, as well as some of the really important cultural aspects of looking at aspects of working in culturally safe ways and looking at the way that these medicines have been used in Indigenous cultures. And so this is a little bit of an overview of the course. And then just finally, to just give all of the details, anyone who's interested, please do apply over the next few days. Applications are just open until the end of this week. The full course fee is around $10,000, but for anybody who that's difficult for, there is financial assistance available. So you can put in an application as normal, and put in an application for that, and then there's opportunities to have the fee reduced by up to 50%. So if it's a stretch, please do put in that application regardless. And there is a code you can put in, as you can see at the bottom here. If you enter opportunity before the end of the week, then the application fee, which is usually just over $200, is brought down to $50. So if you are at all feeling called and feeling a resonance with what we're speaking about tonight, please do put an application in this week so that you can come and join us in this upcoming course that's starting in July. And so with my pitch out of the way, thank you all for that. Let's open up for any questions. And I see Ryan G has popped a hand up. Ryan, go for it.
Hey,
if you'd
how you
like to.
going, guys? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Go for it.
Cool.
Sure.
So I'm currently just started in February my diploma of nursing, and I plan to go all the way to nurse practitioner and then come across. That's going to be years away. But I'm looking at just my pathways and seeing if there's because I saw you said that you do accept nurses. Is there a certain level I have to be? Do I have to be RN or?
If as you're undertaking and on your way through the training process, there's essentially a student pathway into the course, and so you're welcome to put an application or reach out to our team, and we can have a look at that.
Awesome. And also, just quickly, a little side note, it popped into my head just before the call. There's two really interesting books that I've heard good things about, called Pickle and Tickle. I'm just seeing if you guys have heard of any of those, the teachers. PIHKL and TIHKL. They're both, I've heard great things about them and talk about many, many compounds that certain chemists had made and tested and documented.
The pharmacology on the training program is taught by Dave Nichols, who is based in America, and it's someone who I think had New Shulgin, who's the author of those books back in the day. Has been around for all that time. So
hectic. That's good to know.
Thank you. I might even just grab one or two from the chat here as well. Rad's asked, do we hold the breathwork sessions separately from the course? They're a part of the breathwork sessions are a part of the residential training. We do have some plans perhaps to organize to do some versions of these as separate standalone things, but for the time being, it's just a part of the training. Jim.
G'day. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Ellie, Lauren, Tanya, everybody. But I've got the belief that this would be extremely healing for people who with complex PTSD, who are really damaged by multiple aspects of their life. And I'm curious if we've seen any of the psychedelics used here in maybe not yet in Australia, but is there scope in that space, do you think?
Oh, well, the short answer is in the MAPS phase 3 trials, they did have people who had pictures of complex PTSD, and they also had people with dissociative, significant dissociative symptoms, and they all, they all did as well as each other. There was no, so it definitely works. In fact, for me, that's like, I don't know, so it's weird to say that's where my heart is, but like that's like, complex trauma is everywhere, and I think, personally, yeah, it works. Pass to Lauren.
Yeah, I would say the people I've seen with complex PTSD on the trials, for the most part, it has definitely helped. I think the clinical trials are incredibly strict and there's not much flexibility. I think what will be really wonderful in the future is, say, if we could maybe decide, should this person have MDMA therapy first for so many sessions, and then maybe later psilocybin therapy, and just really give an individualized treatment plan, working more with somatic therapy as well, whatever it is that they need to really give them the best possible outcome and the best possible chance. But at the moment, the clinical trials they're very rigid, so there isn't much flexibility there. I'm sure the outcomes will be better down the line once we've got more scope for that.
Thank you.
I might just add something interesting that just brought up in my mind. I've been reading recently a lot of the literature from the 50s and 60s, because they did in the 50s and 60s, they were doing a lot of work, psychedelic assisted therapy work, mainly with LSD. And I was reading about one case study. It's fascinating. If anyone enjoys reading it, anyway, it's really interesting stuff from the 50s and 60s. I was reading one case study where they gave someone 42 sessions of LSD, 42 doses over different days, like over a year, before the person had a breakthrough. The idea was that their mind would not relax. It would not allow them to sort of enter into themselves and their history. And they kept increasing the doses, and they did it 42 times before it worked. So it just shows you that, we're so rigid these days, but if you had flexibility, there's, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ellie. One question that I see a few people asking in the chat here is just about if training, how does it work to be able to work and deliver these treatments in Australia? So I'm not sure, Ellie, if you want to grab that one quickly, or I can take it as well.
I mean, essentially there needs to be an approved psychiatrist so a psychiatrist needs to apply to be able to prescribe psilocybin or MDA. The MDMA, the psychiatrist needs to have done a training program. Then there are essentially three roles in psychedelic assisted therapy. There's a prescriber, there's a primary therapist, and there's a secondary therapist. That's kind of how it's working in Australia at the moment. Now, the prescribing psychiatrist can also be a primary or secondary therapist as well. Currently, according to the TGA, it looks like at least one of the therapists in the room at the time of the psychedelic dosing needs to be under APRA. But it looks like the second therapist does not have to be under APRA. So, for example, PACFA or other, sort of organizations. And so it looks like, and so it's done in teams. You have to do it in teams, which is another wonderful thing about this work. You're actually forced to work with other people, which is nice. And it has to be multidisciplinary, which is also nice, so yeah, it's done in groups. You form, you connect with certain people, you work with them, and that's kind of how it's done at the moment.
Great, thanks, Ellie. And I think that's even a comment on that in terms of opportunities. It's something where, as Tanya mentioned, it was back in January that Ellie dosed the first patient with MDMA as a part of this program, and the number of psychiatrists with permits is now starting to increase. So it was something where with any regulatory change, as we saw with cannabis, for example, it started out slowly as regulators were getting clear on sort of what they were comfortable with, and the first treatment, in that case, the first doctors, but in this case, the first treatment teams were getting up and running. And now we're seeing sort of some of these first providers starting to have their systems in place. And then there's another round of people who are getting permits. So the number of clinics and the number of opportunities is sort of starting to increase. And perhaps an important thing for all the therapists out there is that if a psychiatrist is prescribing, they need quite a few therapists working with them, because there's quite a lot of therapist hours to deliver an individual course of treatment. So the sort of ratio of each psychiatrist to therapist is looking as though quite high in terms of therapists per psychiatrist. In terms of quick questions, is there an intake in 2025? Yes, there will be running the course, this one in July, and then again in 2025, we'll start again in February. And perhaps this is an interesting question about underground practitioners. There are many underground practitioners in Australia who've been doing this work for many years. Is there discussion around legitimizing their work? I'm not sure if Lauren or Ellie, if you have sort of thoughts around this. I think this is a really interesting, it's a bit of an interesting and challenging question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this speaks to the issue of like the medical model and corporate psychedelics and capitalism and yeah, just there's so many issues in this space. This space is not without its problems, and some of the best psychedelic guys I've worked with have been shamanic practitioners on retreats in the Netherlands. And I've learned such a huge amount from them. So it does feel really frustrating and just not okay that these people who have been working in the space for decades and kind of holding this knowledge, carrying this knowledge, taking huge risks as well, you know, in terms of working illegally, but for the benefit of people generally, you know, really supporting healing. So, I mean, I don't know. I very much doubt it, given our culture that we live in. But I would love to see that. And I think you get that more in countries where you're seeing decriminalization happening. People are able to kind of come out of the woodwork and actually say, yeah, I work in this space, which is really important. So I think we should really also be supporting decriminalization more broadly. That's my thoughts anyway.
Terrific, thank you. Now I'm aware we're about to hit time, so perhaps what we might do is look to close up there. Ellie or Lauren, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make to the group?
Just that we'd love to see you in the training program. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Ellie.
Yeah, I would just second that. And it is really, really wonderful work. If you're drawn to it, if you do feel it's your calling, just follow the energy, because that's exactly what I've done. And yeah, there's that expression, isn't there? Like, if you find work you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I genuinely just love this work so much, and it's so incredible. So if you're feeling called, definitely come join us.
Terrific. Thank you both. And so just as a reminder to everyone, those applications are open until the end of this week, until Friday. So please do jump online, cpat@mindmedicineaustralia.org.au. I'll pop it in the chat in a moment, as well, just as a closing thing. And please do put in an application, and I really look forward to seeing you in the course shortly. So thank you all for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have this group together.